Hello, 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 hello. Let's see if we have any signs of life there. If you are watching on and you're ready to go, why don't you type in the chat where you're watching in from today and maybe what the weather is like outside your window. And we'll see if we have any responses coming through. Looks like they're coming in now. If you don't have a window, you should get one. It's going to help improve your work environment. For those of you that don't know who I am, my name is Jason Schwab. I am a producer at Workspaces, and I'd like to welcome you to our very first episode of Office Hours for the year. And it's actually our very first event or experience that we're holding this year. So thank you very much for welcoming us, for joining us. And look, the title of today's episode is Creating Tailor-Made Hybrid Work Environments. When we started reaching out to our community of corporate real estate leaders and workplace innovators, this is something that's really on your mind right now. What we're experiencing is unprecedented in terms of when it comes to the future of work. Remote work has been thrust upon us all, and it's here to stay. It's really unlikely we're going to be going back to whatever it was we were doing before 2020 hit. And when your offices start reopening, most companies, if not all companies, are going to have a significant percentage of employees or some employees or all employees who are going to be working remotely a lot of the time, some of the time, and then also interacting with physical spaces as well. And the impact that this is going to have on the way that you run your portfolios, your real estate strategy, as well as the way that we're going to have to tool these experiences to make sure that our employees are having a good time with it all is largely unknown right now. So that's why we wanted to run this today. And just on that note, I want to run a couple of polls. You should see some polls pop up on your screen in just a minute. The first one is, what is your planned workplace structure once offices fully reopen? And the second one I want to bring up for you guys, it'll pop up on the screen. Are you confident that you'll have an effective hybrid work strategy in place once your offices open up? If you don't see those polls pop up on the screen, you can head to the right of your screen there and click on the chat section. And I'm pretty sure I have an idea of what those polls are going to come back with. Because one reality is that what you guys are dealing with right now is what you were dealing with a lot before the pandemic hit. A lot of you were looking at introducing remote work a lot more for a number of different reasons. And a lot of you were introducing initiatives like activity-based working and just adapting your portfolio to adjust for a modern working reality. So a lot of that was already taking place. But another reality is that there's no case study for this, right? We don't know how this is going to really pan out until it starts happening. And for our audience from North America, most of you don't even have your office locations open yet. So you can't start collecting the necessary occupancy data that you need to start experimenting with all of this. So it's really an unknown. And a lot of the tools and technology that we're going to need to create this new era is also unknown. So that's what we want to do today. We're going to take an opportunity to talk to some of our peers, figure out what their thinking is, what their strategies are heading into 2021 and beyond that as well. And we're going to take a closer look at some of the tools and the technology that's going to help us get there. And I'm just going to see now if you guys have looked at any of the, completed any of these polls in terms of what your structure is going to look like when we get back. We've got 15% who are saying they're going to go office first, 77% saying they're going to be pursuing a hybrid model, and there are 8% who are going remote first, which means everyone's going to be remote and there aren't going to be any offices. So that's an interesting spread, and like we thought, hybrid's high up there in terms of your responses. And for the question, are you confident that you'll have an effective hybrid work strategy in place once your offices open up? 45% say yes. Okay, that's pretty good. 28% say no, and we also have 28% who say 29% who secretly have no idea about what they're going to do after this, which that result actually surprised me. Which makes this discussion all the more important. And even though some of you are probably working on things and thinking about things that you were thinking about before, you were one of those forward-thinking companies, there are still it's not just about what's going to be happening with our physical real estate, and it's not just going to be about what we are creating for our employees in their home environment. It's about the holistic approach that companies can put into place to make this happen. And on that note, I'm going to introduce our first guest. He is no stranger to workspaces. We had him talk at our inaugural 2019 Workspaces Live event. And many of you will know him as the principal of mindSHIFT and also the author of several publications around employee health and well-being and tackling stress in the workplace. He is wonderful. He's full of knowledge, and I'm really happy to welcome Rex Miller to Office Hours. Any second.
Okay.
G'day, Rex.
We're on.
We're here, we're live. Welcome to Workspaces. And Rex, look, it's been 2 weeks into 2021. How are your New Year's resolutions going?
Good. I've actually added some health New Year's resolutions, which is, doing this remote stuff tends to be back to back to back. So
Right.
One of them is that after every session, I have to walk out of my office, go downstairs to the kitchen, get a glass of water, adjust my desk. Those little micro adjustments throughout the day, it's called non-exercise activity. NASA developed it to counterbalance the effect on the body of weightlessness. And we're going to have to adopt things like that in our strategy if we hope to survive this. So,
well, look, I'm really glad you brought that up, Rex, because there's a lot of advantages to working remotely, both from an employee perspective and also a company perspective, and really real savings for companies as well. I mean, I think Global Workplace Analytics reports that as much as $11,000 can be saved per year per part-time telecommuting employee, which equates to around $700 billion in annual savings nationally. So, there's a lot of benefits there for the employee and the company. But can you just talk to us, what is the toll of that on us, and what are employees going to be expecting and needing from their companies as we move further into this?
Yeah, it's that companies are doing a great job in the logistical side, but we're really just beginning to learn the physical health and the mental health side. So, Jason, right now, our brains, it takes about 50% of our body's calories to function in this virtual environment, whereas normal work, it's about 20 to 30%. We've calculated a work equivalency of adding an hour to the day of your work for every hour you're online. So I did a survey with a group I was with yesterday, and somebody said because they're doing international work, they're doing 12 hours of work, but up to 10 plus hours in virtual environment. That means they're working 22 hours equivalency on your body. I did a 4-hour workshop for a company. I measure using the Oura Ring. It's a great tracker, and the Whoop strap. We do a lot of personal performance coaching. And so we've added strain and stress to that coaching. I burned 3,200 calories, and the toll on my body was the equivalent of a 35.6 mile walk. So those 45% of companies that you listed said they've got a great strategy. I'm not sure they've taken this piece into their equation, because we have a real sustainability question, human sustainability question, that we just don't know enough yet to know the toll. The rhythm is different. In the workplace, there was decompression time between meetings, commuting. It's not unusual to be in back-to-back virtual meetings with no break at all. So we need to learn the new rhythms, the new habits and disciplines, and managers need to add that to their managing, not just task management, but almost like a performance coach or a personal coach. Are you getting sleep? Are you hydrating? Are you moving throughout the day? What do we need to do to support you? So those are some of the new questions I think we all need to take consideration of that I haven't seen really addressed yet by many companies.
Right. Yeah. And I like, you touched on a few things there, and obviously the how taxing all of this is on us is something we're yet to really find out. So we're going to be talking about how real estate strategy needs to be retooled moving into this year, and what other tools need to be in place there to accommodate for this. But you touched on management there. So what do companies really need to be doing there to retrain their management and think about their management in a different way so they can be support for the employees?
Well, Gallup says that about 18% of managers are naturally wired to be tuned in to those human needs. And so they just need some guidelines, some framework, and training. But that means that 82% of people are not. They're more task oriented. So they will either need to have there will need to be a new role to help them as a liaison to supplement their management, almost like a personal check-in coach. We've got a couple companies doing that. They found someone who's naturally wired to stay in touch with people and to pick up on needs. And one of the challenges that we're going to find is that people aren't necessarily going to let you know their needs because they don't want to appear to be struggling or to be needy. Everybody has a little bit of fear of the future. Are they going to keep a job? How they're going to keep a job? So creating psychological safety through this environment is part of the new training.
Okay, really interesting stuff. And interesting that you say that not many companies are really getting that right at the moment. I want to come back to that in a second, but with regards to the physical space and the kind of environments that workers are going to be entering into once we really kick into this, what needs to happen there? What do companies really need to be focusing on in terms of what they provide for employees when they get to the office?
Well, it's very similar to the office. You need a place where you can do focus work. You need a place where you can take a break. And so surveying individuals to find out what their needs are, what they currently have, and then also benchmarking employees that seem to have created very conducive environments. They have sit to stand maybe, they've got improved, we're all going to have to up our game in this virtual world. We're not going to be able to have fuzzy cameras and shadows and scratchy sound and improper, bad broadband connection. It doesn't have to look like my studio. That's because I do this for a living. And that was the first choice we made. But it's not going to be acceptable because the experience that we have online is only as good as the lowest quality system in that discussion. And you're kind of held captive to that. So those are some of the needs we're going to have to look at.
Okay, and you mentioned just before that you're not seeing enough happening right now. So what's the extent of that? How bad is it in terms of companies being prepared for this future, do you think? And then what do they need to start doing right now?
Jason, you said it at the very beginning. Nobody really knows. I've got companies that they have no idea. They've got one company has 4 million square feet in just one market alone sitting idle. And they don't know whether to get out of those leases and build for the future or stick with those leases. They don't know if they're going to come back in June. They don't know what the vaccine's going to do. So it almost has to be a experiment and test. Coming back to the workplace, nobody that I've worked with or talked to has a really clear criteria on who should come back and if they're ready to come back. So again, this is another survey to help employees make that decision by giving them information on how to assess their risk. Are you teaching kids at home? Do you have an elder family member who needs care? Are you more flexible? All of those things, and equipping people instead of companies trying to figure it out. We need to put lots of little groups, pods of employees that are in the middle of it to start learning as we go. Test and learn, test and learn, test and learn. instead of trying to project grand scale plans 6 months down the road that you have to set aside. That's the worst. And we've seen that. We're coming back last September. Now we're not. We're going to come back first of the year. Now we're not. We're going to come back June. Now we're not. That creates lots of instability and insecurity in the workforce.
Yeah, it's definitely a process that is going to require a lot of experimentation, Rex. And I'm going to kick on to our next guest just shortly. We haven't got much time to speak with everybody, but thank you for your insights. And just lastly, I want to ask you, obviously this what we're going through right now is awful on many levels. But if anything we've learned in history, crises have often given us an opportunity to create innovation and just completely rethink how we do things too. So, I mean, where's the opportunity here for companies? What should they be thinking of, and how should they be thinking about the nature of work in general? And what's the really big opportunity here to really redo things differently?
Well, I think the big opportunity is that we got off the treadmill. We were already on an unsustainable health and well-being treadmill in the old work environment. Now we can stop, rethink, what is it that I want to bring back? What is it that I don't want to do anymore? And begin to redesign a more human approach to work. And I think that's the big opportunity. We're off the treadmill, and we have no excuse to rethink about how to create healthy, happy work environments as we go forward.
Thank you, Rex. And I just have a late question in here from Sarah Anderson, who's from Genentech, and she asks, how do you balance the equation of employee care and taking care of the business? If you could just answer that quickly.
Well, that's a great question. And I think the lessons that we've learned in the past is that employee care does take care of the business. A happy and engaged employee is the best asset you have. And 70% of employees were unengaged or disengaged pre-pandemic. I'm not sure what the numbers are now. I don't think anybody knows. But caring for your most important, valuable asset is really a business strategy. And there's a lot of companies that do it well. There are the Container Stores of the world. There's the Barry Waymillers. There's the Harley Davidsons. There's the the company in Columbus, Indiana, the Cummins. There's lots of companies who do both. And I don't think it's an either or choice.
Okay. Thank you so much, Rex. We really love talking to you every time we have you on at Workspaces. And your new book is Strategy in Rebuilding. There it is. There it is.
Right.
You put the real book right there. Oh, perfect. Principles for Building Post-Traumatic Growth, which you've been working on with Jeff Jernigan. Check it out if you haven't. Everyone out there that's watching. Rex has really generously also given an offer for our audience of Workspaces. We're going to put it in the chat details there. If you head to his website and you plug in that code that we'll provide in the chat, you get 50% off any of Rex's products. Thank you for that, Rex. Really appreciate it.
Take care.
Wonderful. We're going to jump straight into our next discussion now. And our next guest is Adrianne Rowe. She is the Global Director of Workplace Strategy at Merck. And I do want to say, as we jump into this one as well, make sure you throw your questions up in the chat if you have any questions. I am just a lowly producer of events, so we want to get your insights there as well. Adrienne, welcome. How are you going today?
I'm doing great. How are you today?
Pretty good, pretty good. Where's the first place you're going to visit once this nightmare is over?
Oh, wow. My standards are pretty low these days. Target, Papagino's, I don't know. Actually, we've had we've been wanting to visit Scotland. And so that's kind of first on my big travel list. So hopefully we'll get there when it's all said and done. All
right. Well, if you don't get there, Target's a pretty cool place to go these days. So that's not too bad.
Just as good. Absolutely.
Now, Adrienne, I'd like you to just start off by sort of outlining where you are at Merck at the moment. A lot of the concerns our community is having is what to do with their real estate. And, I guess, what are you guys doing to examine your portfolio right now? What's the situation?
So we've actually been on the journey to activity-based working for the better part of 10 years. And so we have been opportunistically rebalancing our portfolio and right-sizing spaces as lease opportunities come up. We're at an extremely interesting time because, like probably everyone else on this call, we're grappling with trying to crystal ball future behavior and figure out what that means for our real estate portfolio. We also have the added complexity of a spinoff that we're in the middle of. So a pretty sizable piece of our business is going to become a whole new company. And in addition to thinking about the pandemic, my colleagues and I have been spending the past year standing up sites across the globe for the new spinoff. So both of those two things together create, I think, an even bigger opportunity for us to take a look at our existing space and figure out what does that need to look like moving forward. The good news about real estate, good and bad news, is that the cycle is what it is, and a pandemic doesn't necessarily make your lease break date come any sooner. So we have some time on some of our spaces, but as we're coming up on those new decisions, we're absolutely taking a critical look at exactly what that space needs to deliver for us and how much of that space we need.
Yeah, that's one of the main concerns. I know there's a bunch of people in our community that are dealing with long-term leases that are coming up right now and sort of unsure of what to do. I mean, in this kind of climate, what's your experience with this and what's your thinking around the idea of signing a long-term lease right now? I mean, it's pretty hard to get out of these things and renegotiate, right? So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's not a real appealing thought. That's, of course, my personal point of view. But I think, as an employer, we are really putting a premium on flexibility and prioritizing that in our real estate engagement. So just before the pandemic hit, we opened a site with our partner WeWork in downtown Philadelphia. We opened another one a couple months ago in London. And we're going to be leveraging our flexible office network strategy, I think, in different locations moving forward, because it provides us with the ability to, A, stand up a space pretty quickly, and B, on the back end, have that flexibility to adapt as our needs change. So there's really two pieces to flexibility. One is the real estate component, but then the other is the workplace component. And within the space itself, we're focusing on building for change and designing for change. So less focus on lots of hard wall construction, more focus on multi-use spaces and modular design with furniture-based solutions, so that you don't have to do a whole fit out every time there's a change in the way we're doing business. So we're really focused on those two components, the real estate side and the workplace side.
Yeah, flexibility is definitely going to be key moving through this. It's, setting something up and then planning to change it 7 years later or whatever is just not going to work anymore. And bringing it to the physical workplace then. So given how the nature of work is and how it's going to evolve, and people are going to be working from home a lot more than they used to probably, and that's more widespread across the organization. What's the point of a workplace now? Moving into what is the purpose of a workplace now, and how are you going to be balancing the need for, I guess, individual working or more collaborative spaces?
The first thing I would say is that this is not the big step change that I think it might appear to be at face value. I spend a lot of time studying utilization data and understanding the patterns of people coming in and out of the office, and there was a significant amount of off-site work pre-pandemic for years, and it had only been growing. And that's purely due to the proliferation of mobile technology. So irrespective of what the company's policy is on work from home, people have been voting with their feet and working from home. So I think that would be the first comment there. In terms of what the workplace needs to deliver, there are certain activities, we know this from our research, there are certain activities that are better done at home, and then there are other activities that can only be done in the office. And I think virtual communication can take you to a certain extent with respect to network building and relationships, but in person gets you across the finish line. And so it's going to be facilitating those in-person interactions that becomes the primary purpose of the work site. So less focus on individual spaces and more focus on collaborative and community spaces.
Yeah, that's definitely where we can all imagine physical workplaces going. The other side of this as well, and this is a topic that we could expand on in a whole other webcast, but it's making workplaces appealing to employees. And I was speaking to you a couple of weeks ago, and said we've got this idea of making workplaces be this an area for cross-pollination, and I was just like, cross-pollination doesn't sound great in a pandemic. So, I mean, how are we supposed to make workplaces appealing, both from a health and safety point and also just it being a pleasurable place to be where they can collaborate with people?
Yeah. Well, firstly, people need to feel safe in the workplace. So if we're in an active pandemic, we simply won't be going to the office, period. And, no amount of hand sanitizer, masks, and touchless amenities is going to change that. So let's assume that we're in a non-pandemic environment. There's lots of discussion in forums like these about what amenities do you put in place? Do you install a barista? How do you make it a real magnet? But in my experience, what's really going to bring people into the office is the assurance that they will be able to interact with people they want to interact with. That when they come to the office, it's going to be time well spent, and that they won't be sitting down in a phone booth on a WebEx with 8 people who are somewhere else. So that, I think, is the real challenge. How do you engineer presence in a way that continues to be respectful of employees' need for flexibility, but makes the most use of their time when they are in the office? That, I think, is the big challenge we have to face. I don't think it's the quality of the coffee, although, you got to have good coffee, bottom line.
You got to have good coffee. And millennials, I mean, I want kombucha on tap. Where is it? Where is it?
Well, yeah, we're working on it. But, more importantly, I think you want somebody to drink that with, right? You don't want to be drinking it by yourself. So that's what we have to focus on, is how do we get people together?
Okay, I won't be drinking kombucha on my own in the future, I guess. We have a question from the audience here, Adrienne, from Andy House. And he says, in line with your comment about striking partnerships to flex workspace usage, what convergences do you see between workplace and other industries?
Ooh, that's a great one. I think probably my best viewpoint on that is how we're approaching workplace internally within our organization. And it's become a much broader, I think the title of this session should really have been called Hybrid Workplace Experiences. So I think the convergence is with other providers who touch different elements of the workplace experience. So human resources, IT, communications, those are all groups that I'm partnering with more than ever inside our organization, because we're thinking about the employee experience, which is inclusive of, but not limited to, the space itself. So I think externally, maybe we'll see some of the same of that. And we'd already been seeing a lot of that, the merging of hospitality and workplace, and really thinking about experience-driven design. I think we're going to continue to see that moving forward.
Okay. And just time for a couple other questions here. We have another one from the audience, Adrienne, from Leon Rubenstein, just about flexibility again. So do you plan to open any new satellite offices closer to where your employees live? Will these be just shorter leases, or do you plan to get a subscription at some of the offices or service providers, like you mentioned before, WeWork? And how do you plan to furnish those satellite offices, new purchases or moving furniture from your existing HQ?
So there's a lot on the table right now, and we don't have a solid direction in one vein or the other. But what I would say is that, I think there is more to be gained from real estate when you have a center of gravity versus a lot of little locations. The satellite model mainly serves to alleviate commuting situations, but if people have the option to work from their home, do you really need that? Now, there is approximately 1 out of 5 workers who's having a pretty terrible experience at home right now and truly needs somewhere else to go. So, I think that we have to consider the needs of all of those different employee populations. But I don't know that there is, personally, I don't know that there's going to be a lot of benefit in sort of scattering your real estate portfolio while, people are demonstrating that they have the ability and the desire to work from home in the numbers that we're seeing.
Okay. And just lastly, Adrienne, just only time for one more question. It's an audience question as well from Megan Spinos. I'm probably mispronouncing your name, Megan, I'm sorry. But are you making assumptions about the ratio or amounts of your workforce that will occupy your activity-based spaces on a regular basis? In other words, what metrics are you considering to size the space right now?
Yeah, so badge swipe data is the bread and butter of this business. You know, how many people are clocking into the building at any one time? So we're taking our previous, and the numbers are different, they're a little bit different across the globe, so I can't give you a number, but we're basically taking those numbers and hedging them back a bit to say, okay, if we're going to see a more intentional and evenly distributed flexible mode of working, what does that look like in terms of, sorry about that. What does that look like in terms of actual presence in the building? Now, the other consideration is that, you know, our utilization has never been even by day of the week. So that's, you know, you can't really use the average. You have to use sort of the average high. And then the next level to that is, how do you smooth out the curve? So we're working through all of those issues right now, but it's something greater than zero, greater than where we are today, but slightly less than where we were before, which, by the way, was not 80% or 100%. It was less than that.
Right. Wonderful insights, Adrienne. Thank you for sharing what is occupying your world right now. We really appreciate it, and I know our audience does as well. There are more questions coming through in the chat. Maybe you can troll through there and answer them. But thank you for your time, and best of luck for 2021.
Thank you.
Perfect. Now we're going to be jumping into our next discussion right away as well. There's a question in the chat that I see about things that we can do to improve the connection between those who are in the office and those who might be sitting in a conference room, and that revolves around technology. And to introduce the idea of technology and the tools that we might be able to use to create these hybrid work experiences, I want to introduce Andrew Lee in just a moment. He is the Senior Manager of Real Estate and Workplace Operational Technology at VMware, and I'm sure he's going to be able to give us a lot of insights about what they're doing and thinking, and how they're thinking about the technology that is going to be needed to be in place. Hi, Andrew. Sorry, it's a bit glitchy there. It's not quite as smooth as TV. I apologize for that. How are you doing today?
Pretty good, Jason. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. You got any guilty pleasures through this weird period that we're in? What's the TV series you've been streaming the most, if any?
You know, we just finished Bridgerton, which was new on, I think it was Netflix, and so that was a sort of an interesting thing. Also, the other thing that we enjoyed was the one with the chess, the chess master, the woman.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that was kind of, yeah. So yeah, that's basically it, right? You're staying at home, and you know, you're trying to figure out what to go watch next.
Yeah, well, thanks for that insight into how you spend your downtime there. And if I could dive into now what you're doing professionally, you know, I want to know what is occupying your world. You know, as your role in rolling out the technology and tools that your real estate and operations team need. I guess you know, what's changed for you through all this, and what are you working on right now?
Obviously, you know, what's changed is that with everybody working from home, right? You know, from an IT perspective, they need to try to figure out how to provide a near office-like experience. And so, you know, obviously the IT teams are working on that. But from a real estate, as we are thinking about, you know, when we're going to return to the office and what does that look like? And as Adrienne said, right, we know that it's not going to be 100%, even with the vaccine. So, you know, we're in the process of either developing or looking at vendors that can provide us tools and technology that can help with that. And so one of the things, for example, is being something like a seat reservation, an application that, because we are VMware and we do have end user products that our internal team is developing. And so my group is working with them as a customer zero, giving them feedback as a real estate group, you know, what we want. If we were to try to get this from an outside vendor, you know, what are some of the things we're looking at? So that's why we're working with them so that we can really provide a fairly smooth experience from whether an employee chooses to work from home or whether they want to come into the office at X number of days per week.
Yeah, and look, talk to me a bit about the your seat reservation system that you're working on there. What are the key considerations you're thinking about to get that right when an employee makes the decision to come in to work? What needs to be there for that to work for them?
Exactly, and I think the first and foremost is that it has to be fairly easy to use, right? And with everybody being on mobile phones, right, it has to be available to both of that. You have to be able to quickly find what you're looking for, um, from a booking perspective, and on top of that, and when you get to the office, right, the ability to check in so that the system knows that you're actually going to use that desk for that day, as well as one of the things we are looking at, which Adrienne mentioned about, looking to work with others in your group is, how do we deploy a system like that, also guard with privacy, so that, how do you know that your particular group is in a certain location on that given day? And so, do we allow that information to be shared with other people so that they know where you are, or is that a total opt-in kind of thing? And so, aside from the ease of use on that side, the other part of that we're also considering is from a real estate group, right? How is it easy to operate? So how do you, when the floor plan changes, and when we are shifting the layout of an office, when some desks are not going to be reservable, how easy is it for the real estate professional to make those changes, right? We don't want to have to redo the whole floor plan and redo the entire layout of a floor all over again every time there's a small change. So I'm looking at it from both sides, from the employee experience, as well as, how can we support and manage this tool in a fairly easy manner, given the fact that at VMware, we have over 100 offices throughout the world, and especially in our Palo Alto location, some of the floors are, they could have up to 100 to 200 seats, and so manually trying to update those things are going to be a challenge. So we are asking our internal development teams to make sure that those could be automated and or minimal manual intervention.
Okay. And just on that, expanding on that, you mentioned a few things there, considerations. But we have a question from the audience from Marcia Duncan, and she says, what do you anticipate or experience as other downfalls of a seat reservation system?
I think one of the challenges is going to be that, and especially depending on, at what point we come back in, even if the vaccine is more widely spread out, we said we were not going to have everybody come back in at one time. But one of the downside of the system is that, one, right, it doesn't work. We don't want the real estate teams at VMware to be the police, right? If there's two people that says, hey, I reserved this particular desk, and there was some issue in the application, how do we sort of resolve that? And then the other thing on this is that the ability to link that to other things that are needed. So we know that in the old days, when you had your own fixed desk, right, it was your responsibility to go in and clean the desk if you wanted to. And if you didn't, then, basically nobody else was using it, so no big deal. But now with this flexible working environment, right, you use a desk one day, hopefully, right, that there's a way to alert our maintenance and our janitorial team to say, okay, now we need to clean or sanitize this desk for the next person. And so, how do you let them know that out of a given office, certain office desk needs to be clean on that given day? How do you not do that? So those are some of the operational challenges I think we're going to see.
Yeah, and are there any other considerations to take into account with unassigned seating as well? I know that's, just looking through the chat, that's something that our audience members are tossing up as well as a path forward. And I know that's part of your strategy, a big part of your strategy, having unassigned seating. So what other considerations are there around that, and how are you tackling it and designing that experience for employees?
Exactly. I think one of the other challenge of that is, we try to take a best estimate about how many people we think we can support in a given office, given floor, for example, with unassigned desk, right? And we're all looking at ratios about whether it's 1.5 to 1 or 2 to 1, whatever that ratio might be. And so, the challenge is trying to get that number right, because what you don't want is, for somebody that wants to come into the office on a given day to have a desk that's not available, that's because it's the particular floor is too crowded. So you're getting that ratio correct, and building out the neighborhoods, for example, in our system would be, I think, something that we need to really try to hone in on. But it's an inexact science. You can have a ratio, and the only thing we can really do is to monitor the usage and see whether what we guessed was correct or not correct, and make changes based on that.
Right. Okay. And talk to me a little bit. I've got a couple questions just left here, Andrew. And talk to me about your integrated work management system. I believe you're developing that in-house, right? And how's that going? And how are you going to use that to then plan the trajectory and development of your physical workplaces moving forward?
Okay. Actually, it's that one we're not developing in-house. That's pretty complex. So we're using Archibus, and I'm sure that some of the other participants and as audiences here have used that. So that's our IDMS system today. That plays a big role for us because, in addition to just understanding our entire portfolio, right? We're going to use that to carve out neighborhoods within a flexible environment. And even though a particular employee might not be restricted to the neighborhood per se in terms of where they can book their seats, it might be that in working in conjunction with our seat reservation, we might, for example, decide to give priority to somebody who is part of the neighborhood, and so that data comes from Archibus system, and so there's that tie into there. And depending on where we decide to have for example, the real estate teams, mark which desk is or is not reservable. Maybe it's done in Archibus, which then feeds the data to the seat reservation system, or we just feed the raw data to the seat reservation system, which will then, you can use that as to mark that up. So both systems will play with each other, and even if once the seat reservation system is there, the Archibus will always be our source of truth for space and also people.
Right. And a slightly different aspect in terms of how buildings are going to be utilized later on. Obviously, there's a need to have visitors come on site and locations. That's a whole other kettle of fish in terms of bringing other people onto sites and this age of a pandemic. So what are you working on right now to be able to enable that to happen at some point in the future? Right.
So actually, even before the pandemic, we used Envoy. So we started to roll the Envoy visitors out throughout our offices, and we didn't do it for every office. We tried to do it for the ones that we thought were heavily used, or offices that are not just service only offices. And so we'll continue to leverage that tool to make sure that when visitors that are coming on site are more or less invited. In the past, you could sort of just walk up and ring somebody up, but I think we're gonna probably ask, at least in maybe the next year after we open back up, that we want to monitor the fact that everybody that comes on site has a purpose, that or has been invited by an employee. So Envoy will allow us to do that, as well as use Envoy to ask the visitor to attest to their health, or at least agree to some sort of a health and well-being guideline that the VMware might put out there. So I think we'll do that, and then we'll use that because with the analytics that Envoy would give us in the background, we'll continue to monitor, for which offices, where's the busiest, and where do we need to do additional cleanup, or do we need to do something else? So we're fairly happy with the tool, and so I think we'll continue to use that as we go forward, as we reopen.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrew. And just lastly, we are running out of time, but there's been a few requests here in the chat from Leon Rubenstein, Joel Ronsky, just addressing that, I guess, unfair amount of access that might develop between people who are in the office and people who are working from home. So a question is, what are the technologies to gap the differences in experience between those who do come into the office and those who work from home?
I think one of the things that VMware's done really well is that even before the pandemic, right? We were equipped with laptops and Zoom and other tools that for if we had to work from home for a given day or week because you got sick or whatever, it was still and it was still good, and the experience was fairly decent, and we have obviously most of us have access to Wi-Fi, and so really what we miss by not going onto the office, I think, is that personal interaction. So from a technology perspective, I think we're good. I mean, VMware has been great in terms of providing allowances, especially during the pandemic, for us to get additional equipment in your home if you needed to, allowances for subsidizing some of the potentially Wi-Fi costs. And so I think we're fairly even on par. I mean, for me personally, for example, working before, the only thing I do miss is the fact that at my desk at work, I used to have 2 bigger monitors. And so now at home, I don't have really a room for additional monitors. So I just have one, and I use my TV as my second one. So, but from a Zoom perspective, being able to call somebody, and also chatting online, whether it's through Slack or Teams, it's all there. So for us, the divide is not that great. It really is that personal interaction, maybe being able to grab somebody down the hall and make a quick decision or a quick discussion. So I think that's missing, and I'm sure that all the other companies are in the same situation.
Perfect. Andrew, thank you so much for sharing your insights and letting us into the world of VMware and what's happening there. It's really helpful to understand what everyone else is going through. So thank you so much for joining Workspaces, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And look, I see everyone's interacting really wonderfully there in the chat. Some really great insights there, and keep sharing your experiences. Keep throwing questions at me, and I'll try and throw them in as we go along. And to round out our discussion today, I'm going to introduce our last guest, who is Remington Wu, who is the head of customer success at Envoy. Originally, we were going to be joined by Matt Harris from Envoy, but he wasn't able to make it. So Remington's going to be stepping in for today. For those of you that don't know, Envoy is a platform. It provides a bunch of smart tools, from everything from getting people through the door, as well as tracking packages to buildings, as well as gathering occupancy data, and a bunch of other things that we're going to talk about in a minute. So without any further ado, I'm going to bring on our last guest for office hours today. Remington, welcome to the chat today. How is everything going? And what's the first concert you're going to be going to once everything's over?
Everything is going great today. First concert is the first one that's available. So whatever one's out there, I'll just skip to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Country or rap.
I can't yeah, in an age of pandemic, I can't really imagine being sweaty and jumping up and down with a bunch of people, but I miss it. I really miss it.
Oh, yeah.
Look, Remington, thanks for joining us today. And, Envoy's come a long way since you guys started out in terms of providing a system to have people register when they came to a building. Since over the last year, how have things changed for you guys? What are the conversations like that you're having with your partners at the moment?
Yeah, so back in March when all this started, it was a lot of conversations happened. People kind of looked to us to see what we could do to kind of bridge this, for an unknown amount of time, kind of COVID time. How can we help them bring their employees safely to office where they need? Adrienne referenced something about, 1 in 5 workers don't have a great home office setup. And that's very true. And some people still need to come in for some kind of experience. So, we helped build the kind of intermediate COVID response, which is our Protect, which kind of helps screen employees, both health and then occupancy, so we can limit the number of people based on county and state guidelines, which was very popular, and a lot of, we had over 2 million check-ins in that time. Now, as it's gone on, it's kind of the conversation steered more towards the entire workplace. So I've seen a lot of things in the chat about shared seating. So we kind of launched our desk booking solution, and a lot of things around analytics and capacity analysis. So how many people came in at what times and what locations. So people like Andrew and Adrienne can make decisions around real estate, informed with the right information.
Right. And look, that's interesting in terms of getting a gauge on where everyone's headed with their strategy at the moment. I'm just going to run another poll here and bring it live for everyone to take part in. And the question is, what new office technology do you plan on investing first when it comes to jumping into this hybrid world? So we'll give that a few seconds while you answer the next question and see what the responses are. And one of the main things that you mentioned that you're focusing right now on helping companies out with is figuring out what the occupancy rates are going to be like in buildings. And, once you help, what kind of data are you able to help companies gather, and where do they go from there? How do they take that data and then translate it into transforming the physical workplace so that it fits with this world we're heading into?
Yeah, so right now at this point, we, for anyone who uses our platform, we can track everyone who's signed in to a space, so any given day. So we know, and then can limit again how many people are allowed in that space for current times. But as it goes on, we're adding additional, functionality and analytics into not just the building, but which specific space. So I think that, data is going to be king in this in terms of what kind of spaces are people going to want. So are people gravitating more towards shared space, like, those lounge type activities? Are they more in conference rooms? Are they just going to their individual desks? So that is kind of where we're building out further analytics for everyone to see. So, people on this call can make better informed decisions about what kind of real estate they need to provide, and not just size, but what kind of form does it take? What does it look like? Do they need couches? Do they need long, standing tables? Do they need individual pods? All those things can really save you cost, but also, and more importantly, increase the employee experience, so they actually like coming into the space.
Right. And Remington, I want to jump now just to talking about the employee experience. So, hybrid is going to happen. And for most companies, it's going to be make or break in terms of making this a wonderful experience for employees in terms of accessing the talent pool moving forward. So I guess, and there's a lot of talk about having an all-round interface that employees can interact with sometime down the track. So how do you envision what it'll be like for an employee who's coming into or makes the decision or has to come into a physical workplace on a given day of the week?
Well, it's super interesting. Okay.
Sorry, I'm not sure what happened there. You had some music, background music, but it's gone now.
It's okay. Just wanted some extra. I always like music. So in terms of like what employees are going to need, I think here's the challenge is how do you, companies in general in this century have gotten really good at making the office amazing, right? There's all these amazing perks, benefits, snack counters, masseuses who come to your desk, ergonomic studies. So how do you do that now in both the remote office hybrid world? And I think that's the big challenge that people are going to have to confront and resolve, right? Because we don't want remote workers to also feel neglected, right? It's a super valid and valuable form of work. And so the same thing goes to hybrid. When it comes to the actual challenges of booking people into a space, I think that part we're well on the way to resolving here at Envoy. So there's a number of spaces that we have our own mobile app that people can just reserve a space, whether it's a conference room or a desk on the fly, as well as doing the kind of whole health screening. We want to take it a step further into, if you think about it, some people here mentioned satellite offices, right? So you're going to have a lot of different locations possible in one geographic location. So let's take the San Francisco Bay Area. You have Oakland, San Francisco, Palo Alto, the South Bay. How do you give access to everyone who needs it, right? Let's say I need to go to a meeting, or I want to work in the South Bay in the morning, and then I want to work in San Francisco in the afternoon for a follow-up meeting. How do I do that? A lot of security professionals, provision access control to an individual space, when you first get hired. So now you need a more flexible access control system. That's something that we're investing in heavily. We're already integrated with over 20 different access control providers. So once you approve someone to work in the space where they reserve a desk, it'll automatically give them access to that building for that day or whatever given time period. So it's details like that I think you really have to hone in on to make the experience great. So it's all, people want to do it and it's workable. And at the end of the day, you'll retain and then attract new talent.
Yeah, and look, I want to take that a little further because this idea of creating a totally different experience and having this idea that employees might have an interface to interact with their workplace and how they want to work. And I guess what's the importance of making all of that as seamless as possible for employees? And, when we rope in and talk about amenities as well, I mean, where could that go? Do you have any pie in the sky thinking about how that, amenities and what employees need and how that can be roped into that interface or that experience?
Yeah, so we're investing in a mobile app for employees that we want to bring to make available to all of our users, and from that we also plan to add an amenities platform. So if you think about okay, so we're going to go hybrid. That means X percentage of people will be full-time remote. Certain people will be hybrid. They'll come in a few days a week. So your real estate footprint can lessen in some ways, right? And you'll be able to save costs. But we want to take a step further and think about how to not only save costs, but how can you reinvest that? The company was already investing in real estate. How can you reinvest it to boost productivity and employee satisfaction? Things like food and beverage management. I know this is kind of a hot topic through certain companies right now, but how do you bring not waste food, but also how do you bring the right type of food for certain people who have different dietary restrictions, gluten allergies, etc. And then you can even extrapolate further. Like one of the biggest things that Envoy, when we surveyed our employees, what is something that they're having the most trouble with? Childcare was like the number one for people with parents. Childcare has been a nightmare, right? They have 2 kids at home, they're trying to work, it's a Zoom meeting. So what we've been toying around with the idea of is how can you provide just on-demand childcare through the app, right? As an employee perk or a benefit. And I think that's really an area that we need to collectively as managers and people in our industries, like think out ahead of what are the benefits we can offer. How do we keep pushing the boundaries to make the hybrid and remote perks and benefits amazing?
Right. Andrew, sorry, Remington, I'm just cognizant of the time here. It's really interesting to hear about how you guys are thinking about this and how we can really start reimagining the way in which we interact with our workplaces and our companies and the work that we do. One of the things that came up a lot when people were registering is talk about vaccination. And just as we close out here, I'm going to just run another poll, whether or not companies plan on asking employees if they've been vaccinated. And I know, through the Envoy platform, that is a capability that you can build in if this is what we're heading into. What kind of conversations are companies bringing up with you when it comes to this topic, and what's their thinking like, and what are the challenges around it?
Yeah, so I think number one, the challenge is data and responsibility, right? So historically, companies do not have access to employee medical records. Right? It's just not something. It's not a boundary that has been crossed in history, really. So when you start getting into things like a vaccination, which is technically a medical procedure and is part of the medical record, that is a very company-to-company based decision. And I've personally worked and talked with dozens of companies, both in technology, pharmaceutical, manufacturing, and it's really industry dependent from what I've seen, and also company culture dependent. So it's something that each company needs to really evaluate if that's something that they want, because they can also technically be a slippery slope, right? So yes, we all know in COVID world the vaccine is going to be important, but what about 2 years from now, 5 years from now? Is this does it open a door, so to speak? What we did, we built just data retention features in our software. So the company, can actually set whether you want to keep a field or have us delete it forever. So you can set it, keep it for a day or keep it for a week or just never retain it at all. So we just wanted to give everyone flexibility based on the conversations we've been having, because I think it's a very important discussion, and some employees aren't going to feel comfortable with their employer having that information. So we're trying to build in safeguards. So, in that case, the employee will never actually save it, or, you don't have to ask the question in the first place. But from what we're seeing, it's a very hot conversation. I don't have a definitive direction just yet, but it's coming.
Yeah, it's definitely an area that is going to take a bit of thinking and leadership, I guess, to navigate. And in the polls, we've got 27% of people saying their companies are looking into it, and 20% saying absolutely not, and another 42% saying no idea, and 17% who say keep your filthy hands off our privacy. So gives you an idea of what that is like. But look, Remington, we are out of time. Everyone has to run on to other things, I'm sure. So thank you for sharing your experience and sharing also what you're working on at Envoy and how you're thinking about revolutionizing the future of work. So thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Perfect, Remington. Thank you. And to all of you out there who are still with us, thank you so much for joining us on our very first episode of Office Hours by Workspaces. We have a lot of exciting things coming up through the year. Keep your eyes and ears open. And I do want to share this with you right now. we are intending on having a live event happen in mid-November in the fall there. Destination is not yet set in stone, but we are, as a hint, making it somewhere where our tech friends out west might be able to drive to. So that is the thinking at the moment. Hopefully we can make that happen. And in the meantime, we are also going to be potentially running more webcasts like these, but we're also going to be launching other experiences like our Mastermind series, which is a series of closed door digital roundtables where you can come together with your peers and talk about a specific topic as candidly and as genuinely and as casually as you want. And we've had a lot of success running those in different verticals that we're in. So we're really excited to launch these products and these experiences throughout the year. So if you haven't already, make sure you sign up to our blog and also to our website so you can keep up to date with all the wonderful things that we have coming up in the future. Thanks so much for joining us on Office Hours today, and hopefully we'll see you in the future. Have a great rest of the week and weekend.